If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard in Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place.
All right, everybody, please welcome to the show the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, the National Treasure, Nick Aldis. Nick, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show, man.
No problem.
So how's it been since the whole pandemic has been going on? I know the NWA is shut down, and you guys were kind of busy doing online content for a while, and then they kind of suddenly stopped a little. But you have been out there a little bit. So how's everything else going?
Well, you know, I'm sure that my story is not that dissimilar to a lot of people in the world. You know, there's been a lot of changes, but I'll say for me, I've taken a lot of positives from it in the sense that I've been able to have more time to devote to launching my new company and doing more stuff at home. And my wife and I just bought a new house, and we're stoked about that. And so it's and we've had a hell of a lot more time than we used to together, and obviously as a family, and that's been great. So it's like, as far as the NWA and my professional stuff has gone, sure, it's frustrating, but ultimately no one really knew how this was going to shake out, and I think that it was a combination of a couple of those things that kind of led to Billy just wanting to kind of take a step back for a minute and regroup, and I respect his decision. So again, no one really knows what the right answer is in any of this, and we weren't under any financial obligation to produce any content, so it was kind of like we didn't want to do stuff for the sake of doing it. And all I can say for me personally, from a professional standpoint, is that Billy and the NWA have taken very good care of me. They've paid me my salary the whole time, so nothing has changed in that regard, and I'm grateful for that. So it's kind of like, I understand and appreciate that it was not the case for everyone. So it's kind of like, I can understand when people say, I wish they would do this, I wish they would do that. I've kind of stayed somewhat neutral on it because my own circumstances have been pretty unaffected, in that regard. But that's why my loyalty is with the company and with Billy, and we're excited about getting things going again here very shortly.
It's supposed to take place this coming spring, correct? From what I've heard.
Yes, there's. Obviously, there's nothing I can share as of yet, but I think within the next, I would pretty confidently say within the next couple of weeks, there'll be some very positive news about the NWA going forward. And honestly, in many ways, I think that from a momentum standpoint, the shutdown obviously didn't help. We had a lot of momentum going, and we were on course to fill an arena. I mean, literally fill an arena with the Crockett Cup, 2020 with me and Marty too. But ultimately, it's kind of like you can't spend your life wondering about what would have happened or what if. We just take solace in the fact that we got to that point within like 3 years.
Yeah.
With with a very limited budget, and we didn't have tens of millions of dollars to spend on going out and getting talent and production and all those sorts of things. But we bootstrapped ourselves to a point where within 3 years of launching, we were on course to fill an arena for a pay-per-view. So, I think fans sometimes lose sight of that because their first inclination is always to just compare any promotion to WWE,
right.
And it's like comparing us to WWE is like comparing a startup tech company to Microsoft. It's kind of like,
yeah,
guys, they got a bit of a head start on us. You know what I mean? Especially with the McMahon family, obviously, generations in the business. It's not like it's a there's a lot to work with there, and they're the market leader for a reason. But we don't concern ourselves with that. We have, and I think that you can see that from the fact that we've cultivated relationships with all of the major companies, really. And there's even been communication with WWE. Like we don't see ourselves as adversarial to anybody. We're trying to carve out our own spot in the business, and I think there's a hugely untapped portion of the market, and I think I know how to go after it.
Now, when it comes to cross-brand, collaborations going on, recently we've been seeing All Elite Wrestling doing some stuff with Impact, and now we're seeing some stuff with Impact and New Japan Pro Wrestling. Do you ever think somewhere down the line could we see something with like the NWA, possibly in communications or negotiations with another brand like Impact or AEW? Now, I know throughout the course of time, the NWA has lost a couple guys, as we've seen like James Storm back in Impact, and now we've seen Eli Drake down in NXT as LA Knight.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you're asking a question about could we see it, but you've already seen it.
Right.
We already worked with Ring of Honor on All In and on a bunch of other shows. Like, we sold out Center Stage in Atlanta with the NWA title on top. It wasn't the Ring of Honor title on top. It was 10 pounds of gold on top, and we sold out Center Stage in Atlanta. New Japan and CMLL both sent teams for the Crockett Cup in 2019. We've worked with Ring of Honor obviously extensively, and Thunder Rosa has been farmed out to AEW. So it's like we're doing it already. I think that there's just this thing where, like, when AEW does something, everyone acts like it's the first time it's been done, and we're kind of like, like we're happy for those guys and what they're doing, but I get asked that question every interview I do, and I'm going like, we already did that. We're doing it. We're the ones who we coined the phrase "open for business." Like we're the ones who've been saying that from the beginning. So it's like, yeah, nothing has changed in that regard. Like, we'll do stuff when it makes sense and when the time is right.
Right.
Now, you guys were working one of the things that I was really looking forward to, you guys started to work this really good interpromotional angle with Ring of Honor. Is there a possibility that will return when the NWA runs up again, or is that not going to happen?
I think there's a possibility of it. I mean, but possibilities and plans are two different things, and I'm cautious about how much I've said, because someone takes a snippet of this interview and turns it into Nick Aldis says Ring of Honor and NWA are going to work together. It's just like you can't say anything now without it being misquoted and taken out of context and everything else. The possibility is there. Yeah, we still maintain a dialogue with Ring of Honor.
Right.
Obviously, I did. I worked the. We did an extensive build to me and Mike Bennett, and told that story of Mike's kind of return to the wrestling business outside of WWE, and that we engineered that. I engineered that. I was the one who said, I can do something with that. Like, let's, I want Mike Bennett. Let's make that happen. And, shortly after that, he's now, back in Ring of Honor and signed, and that's great. So it's like, we've never stopped communicating with Ring of Honor since we started working with them in 2018. You know, there's a regular communication there. It's just, I think that, you know, there's a portion of the fan base that devote a hell of a lot of their day to wrestling compared to the average consumer of the product. And so when you're devoting hours every day to wrestling, you start to develop a sort of lack of patience because you're going, well, why isn't this happening right now? I want this, I want this to happen today. You know, I want someone to show up on the show tomorrow. You know, and it,
right,
like, you know, you're talking about we've all got to try to play the long game here. We've all got to try to sort of make stuff last a long time, you know, and to be able to build stuff over time so that we can get people to buy pay-per-views and eventually when we were able to get people to buy tickets again. So it's like, right. It's not a case of, we are like, sorry to disappoint anyone who hears this, but we are never, the NWA, we are never going to be that promotion that are just constantly hot-shotting stuff for short-term in social media buzz, because it does not pay the bills. Like, right. If we don't get people to buy pay-per-views and we don't get people to subscribe, we don't get people to buy merchandise and buy tickets, we don't eat, right? Like, we don't have right. that cushion. We don't have the cushion of a, you know. So whenever you're comparing something that we do to something that WWE or AEW does, you have to keep that in mind, that they have a totally different business model. Yeah. Because they're, you know, in both of those cases, but especially in AEW's case, their primary revenue stream is their television rights fee. That's their master, you know, that they serve the most. We have our model is different. We have to try to sort of cultivate and maintain several revenue streams to be successful. So it's different model, different approach.
Now, stepping into the virtual world for a second, you have an upcoming project with Retromania, which is supposed to be released this month. Can you give us a little bit of insight on the video game and what to expect for us fans to expect outside of like different wrestling games that we've played throughout the years?
Well, first of all, let me qualify this by saying that I am not an avid gamer. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to use any lingo that gamers will know, or I'm certainly not going to pretend that I'm any kind of expert. But the premise of the game is that it is a sequel to WrestleFest, the classic, arcade game of the 90s, right. Or whatever. And it's funny because I remember playing that game. I did play that game. I played it in the arcade with my brother, and we, and I think on the Sega, Mega Drive or Genesis or whatever it was. But I mean, for me, it's been a long time coming. So I'm afraid I probably don't know much more about the game in terms of the layout and the format as anyone else, because I think they've been quite forthcoming with sharing their graphics and teasers and clips and stuff. Obviously, I've seen some of it before it's been released, and I've recorded voiceover stuff for it, and and obviously we did the commercials and everything. We've worked closely with Mike and those guys, and they've been great. And my intention is to launch a Twitch channel primarily focused on Retromania, which because obviously it's very cool to have a game where an entire mode is sort of devoted to me and the company and sort of primarily obviously me and the 10 pounds of gold. It's one of the modes in the game is the 10 pounds of gold mode, where you have to beat a number of guys in order to qualify for a title shot against my character. So that's a cool feel, and I thought, well, maybe that's something that fans would enjoy, is doing Twitch streaming with me with the actual game that I'm in, it's in real time, because obviously I saw it as a sort of unique opportunity that doesn't necessarily exist you know, in a lot of cases. So I'll be trying to make that happen, but you know, I'll need some help. But once the game is launched, you should be looking to get that thing up and going in the next couple of weeks here. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I think that it'll be a lot of fun for people who, especially ones who remember that WrestleFest game, because it's, from what I've seen at least, it's really visually similar. I don't know about, obviously I haven't played it yet. Well, I think they're going to send me an advanced copy here in the next few days, so that'll be interesting. But yeah, it looks like a lot of fun, man. I'm very excited about it.
You recently had an action figure produced, did you not? Tell us about that.
Well, it's funny that kind of goes in the same vein as Retromania. I think the timing of it was good, and they thought of me as the most suitable guy to sort of do their debut launch with. And I think because of that's one of the things I love about what I've done with the NWA is that in being this sort of retro, for lack of a better term, kind of presentation, it opens the door to a lot of unique marketing opportunities.
Right.
You know, so with a lot of guys sort of now, my generation now, sort of in their early 30s, it's kind of like, you know, it's a sort of peak marketing demographic. And, you know, so a lot of the throwback stuff that kind of gives them that, you know, that kind of nostalgia from their formative years is smart business. And I think in many ways it was just the same kind of situation as Retromania. It just made sense. The deal was really easy to do, and it's performed remarkably well. You know, we've all made some money off it, so that's really cool. You can get that at cellatoys.net. Or I think you can get it in the States from JB Toys. So yeah, it's cool, man. It's a lot of fun. And again, I'm really, really pleased with how it's come out. And, you know, seeing a lot of fans interact with me when they get the figure and showing it, and, you know, and being like, you know, so psyched about it is a good feeling.
Backtracking a little bit. So you grew up in England. Now, before breaking into the wrestling business, was there any other sports that you were destined to, any other sports that you were proficient in before breaking into the wrestling business that you considered possibly pursuing?
I mean, like a lot of kids in England, you know, I dreamed of being a football player. I was all right. I played at county level and had a few trials for some of the bigger clubs, sort of as you know, the youth programs and stuff, and that's about as far as I got. But you know, the thing with football is, like, for the most part, there are exceptions, obviously, but most of the time now the competition is so fierce and the talent is, you know, that most people, they know if you have it or not by the time you're like 15 or 16. You know. And by the time I got to that age, I'd already sort of realized, like, I ain't gonna compete in that, you know, at that level. And honestly, by the time I got to my teenage years, I'd already been bitten by the bug for wrestling. So I was already sort of working out and trying to sort of, you know, focus on bodybuilding, because, believe it or not, when I decided I wanted to be a pro wrestler, the first thing I decided to do was I needed to get in shape and have a good physique. You know, as shocking as that may be in the current climate. But so I was already sort of like putting other sports on the back burner a little bit. I competed at the national championships in swimming when I was in high school, and tennis. So it's like swimming was my best sport, no doubt. Like I dare say that, had I had the passion for it and really sort of, you know, dedicated myself to it and you know, applied the same level of discipline to that as I, you know, then did to wrestling or to you know, to bodybuilding stuff, I probably could have been all right. You know, I probably could have done well. So I had the right build for it. I had talent, and I obviously, my times qualified me for the nationals, and I'd never even really had a proper coach. So I think if out of all the sports I did, I probably would have had the best shot at doing something in swimming. But I had made up my mind I wanted to get into the wrestling business by the time I was in my mid-teens. So.
How did you discover pro wrestling?
I always knew of it. I think that when I was a kid, it wasn't like I watched it. It wasn't like it was appointment viewing for me as a small child. But even as a small child, I still knew who everybody was and had the figures and stuff like that, which is just a testament to the quality of WWF's marketing.
Right.
Because it's like, it was just part of pop culture, and so I was always aware of it. It was when, it was around Bret Hart was my hero. So it was like around the sort of mid to late 90s where I started going like, God, Bret Hart's so cool, like that's what I want to be like. And I think, when Bret turned heel, and then we were sort of heading into the early days of the Attitude Era. Like that's when I really started going like, ooh, like I really like how this, how these guys, like I just remember just thinking, I started comparing everything that was happening in my life to a wrestling angle, because it was sort of, that's what wrestling is. It's a morality play, so it's like, I just started really getting in, so invested in the idea that, wow, like these guys could just control people's emotions like that and just have this sort of create these incredible sort of stories. They're like you're making a sports movie every week. And that was it for me. I was kind of like, that's what I want to do. I knew instinctively that I had the ability to tell those same kind of stories.
Now, getting into professional wrestling, out of everybody you trained with, you actually did some time in Harley Race's wrestling academy?
Yeah.
Now, how was that encounter like, just getting to just pick the mind of like Harley Race and, just first impressions?
Oh, I mean, I was so nervous and intimidated going to meet Harley and to train there, because by the time I had gone to that, I was a sponge. I was a student of the game. I had watched everything, read everything I could about, Harley, and really gravitated to that sort of 80s NWA kind of style and presentation and the storytelling. And, I idolized Triple H as a kid. So hearing the constant comparison to Harley Race sort of made that connection even stronger for me, because I would always hear JR say, "Oh, shades of Harley Race, he's got Harley, he reminds me of Harley Race with his mean streak and this kind of." And I started going like, let me dig deep into this Harley Race, because obviously as a kid I wasn't really that familiar with him, because I was born in 1986 and the NWA and WCW didn't have anywhere near the level of exposure in the UK that the WWF had. So it wasn't until much later that I, became a student of the game and started consuming so much, and I just started going like, holy cow, like the NWA in the 80s, like the wrestling is unbelievable, like just like the pace and the athleticism and the realism and it felt like a sport, and the big fight feel they would create with their title matches, Flair and Harley, Flair and Dusty, Flair and Steamboat, Dusty and Harley. I mean, I was just like, this is the shit. This is what I want, and so when I saw that Harley had a camp, I was just like, I'm going to that. And I was already a full-time wrestler by then. I broke in the business at 17 with the Knight family, and because I had a good look, because I worked hard on having a decent physique, I stood out compared to everyone else my age and in my class and everything like that. So I got booked on stuff pretty quick, and then I met Doug Williams at a different school I went to called Dropkicks. And Doug, same thing, could tell that I was an athlete and I, really wanted this, and so he then put me over to some different promoters, and even got me booked to wrestle him, which was huge for me at 18 to get to wrestle Doug Williams. Everyone looked up to Doug at that point because it was like he was going all over the world and making money, and had so much respect in Europe and Japan and Ring of Honor and stuff. So I was already a full-time wrestler because everywhere I went, they would say, you need to go work with Brian Dixon, because he was the number one promoter, and he was running, hundreds of shows a year. My first year in the business, I probably wrestled 250 shows.
Wow.
So it was like I could, I was a full-time, I said sometimes I think that maybe that's why guys like Dory Funk and Harley and stuff kind of gravitated to me a little bit, because I did in a lot of ways sort of come in almost like a territory, like going to do the camps for Dixon. It was very much like that. There was no contracts. It was like, I remember I called Brian on the phone and he said, okay, come on Tuesday and pack for a week, and basically if I didn't completely shit the bed, like he would book me for the week, and that was it. He was like, okay, and that was like every week you just sort of showed up kind of, you sort of, he would, sometimes he would send you a schedule, but sometimes it would just be kind of like, all right, come on Tuesday and we'll see where we are kind of thing. And, and he would say, all right, you're in this car, you're going with them and you're going to do Butlins, or if you had other shows somewhere else, all right, you're in that team, you're going off and doing these. And, that was the same for me, for Stu Bennett, Wade Barrett, Drew, Sheamus, so we would all sort of bump into each other here and there. Like we'd do some shows together, and then some of us would be going off to do another show because Brian would have, Brian would sometimes have 3 shows in one day, so it'd be like, all right, the Northern team, you're going up to do this show here, and then there'd be a bigger show, so then we'd all be on one show together, and then and then some of us would head back south or head wherever, and that would be it. It was like being in a territory. So when I did Harley's camp, I literally took time off from being a wrestler to go train with it, to go. I just wanted to get better, sharpen my skills, and sort of make connections.
Is that when you first came over here to the United States?
Yeah.
Yep. Where did you go?
I went to Atlanta for a bit, and then I went to Harley's camp, and but for me it was all about Harley's camp. Like that's what I was focused on, and Harley was. I was very intimidated, but at the same time, Harley was, and his wife BJ was so gracious, so accommodating. Harley didn't say a lot, he man a few words, but it's a funny story. They were really impressed by the fact that I'd come all the way from England. They couldn't believe it. Like they couldn't believe that a kid from England would come all this way. And I was like, "You're Harley Race," like of course,
Right.
And I remember, the town he would do that camp in was Eldon, Missouri. It was like, the town was a road, and like, I remember. The hotel that we were staying at, right across the street, is a big strip club, and it's like very obviously a strip club. It's a big sort of building completely on its own, big neon sign. I don't know what it's called, and it's like, I was at that point in my life I had not visited many establishments like that, and it was, I'm sitting there with Harley Race, do you know what I mean? I'm sort of trying to be on my P's and Q's, and it's kind of like, but it's, just sort of looking, and Harley obviously saw me look at it, and then he goes, if you want to go in the titty bar, just tell them Harley sent you, they'll take care of you. And I was just like, oh, okay then. But yeah, he was just cool to me from the beginning. With it, like I said, he didn't say a lot, but he must have, there was, so the guys at that camp who stood out were Joe Hennig, Sam Shaw, who's now Dexter Lumis in NXT, and myself, and a couple other. There was some really good guys there, but I think out of everyone, we could tell that those were the guys that wanted it.
Right.
And Harley, he would sort of pull me to the side, periodically here and there throughout the. I mean, they were brutal days. I mean, they were very hard training, but he would every now and then would kind of call me over because he would just sit in the corner like smoking a cigarette, just kind of like watching everything, and then, like every now and then he'd be like, "Come here," and he'd be like, "You look good out there, kid. Keep at it. You look real good." I'd be like, "Oh, cool, thank you." And that was that. I mean, that meant the world to me. But yeah, to start there, and then to sort of to come full circle to where I did, and for Harley to kind of endorse me like he did, as NWA champion before he passed away, was that's you can't put a price on that.
Now,
that's amazing.
I mean, unfortunately, everybody has that fantasy in mind of maybe one day, hey, we could have had a chance to wrestle Harley Race, but throughout your 850 plus days as NWA World Champion, one of your challenges was actually against Harley Race's son. How was that experience like? And is there any shades of his father, or is he just taking his own route?
He's definitely taken his own path. He's a very good worker, very solid wrestler. Again, that for me was every title defense I do. My intention is to make it feel like the most important thing in the world. So, in many ways, I try not to sort of put too much of a. I try not to, to make any one match feel any different to another. So that because that would be doing a disservice to the paying audience, and I try to, I try to give everyone their money's worth, whether there's 10 or 10,000 in the building. So in many ways, I just sort of looked at it as another day at the office. But obviously, the fact that Harley is there, and obviously Harley wanted to make that happen. Like he just, I think in his mind, it was more like he just wanted to he wanted to see it for himself, and he wanted to sort of, because I would never. There's no way to say this without it seeming a little bit pretentious, but I think deep down maybe Harley, even if it was just a little tiny bit, sort of like a tiny little bit of himself in me. So I think it was almost this way of kind of, because it wasn't like he said, "Oh, make sure you make my son make Leyland look good, and make sure you." He never said a word. He didn't have to, but it was like, I think in some ways it was more like for his benefit to kind of like, hey, you need to work with a guy like this, because it was. Because, like, I mean, I drove the car, right? Like, it was very much like, I was in control. There was never any sort of, and Harley showed me that respect by kind of allowing it to be that. And we tore the house down. And so it was like, I was just, like I said, I was happy to do it, but, it wasn't like that. In many ways, that match was for one person, but it just happened to be a building full of people there who were standing at the end. So that's all you can hope for.
Tell me about your series. Now, you worked as one of probably I consider a legendary series with Tim Storm. How do you feel about that? And like going into it, I guess you lost your first match with Tim because there was I guess a foot on the rope, and for championship wrestling from Hollywood, excuse me. And I guess you demanded a rematch for that, and that's where you won the title at the CZW event. What was it like working with Storm?
I consider it one of the highlights of my career. I think it's certainly one of my favorites. because it's, I think, look, it's an achievement in the sense that we basically, Tim and I were an experiment.
Right.
It was like, let's see if this works. Like, let's see if we could, like, when Billy bought the NWA, they called me, and Billy basically sort of described a vision that he had for the brand and how he wanted it to be different from everything else that was going on. And I said, I completely agree, but I also have a completely different, I also have a vision to do a completely different style of content as well. Like, instead of just getting a ring, getting a bunch of wrestlers, booking a bunch of matches, and, going, hey, watch this. Like, I said, I don't watch every boxing. I don't, if I'm channel surfing or I'm just kind of looking for something to watch on TV, I'm not going to watch like any boxing.
Right.
But I'll watch a fight that has piqued my interest. And most of the time it's because I've seen an HBO 24/7 or well, not anymore because they're not doing boxing anymore, but Showtime All Access or, and obviously there are other companies now, getting into the boxing game, but like, that's what would draw me in, because I would go, all right, I mean, nobody did it better than HBO. I mean, that was the gold. HBO boxing is, to me, the gold standard of sports entertainment presentation, because that's sports entertainment. Like creating these powerful, documentaries, movies that get you so invested in these two guys' journeys, and to go, okay, by the time you sat through one of those, you're like, there's no way I can miss this fight now. Now I'm buying that pay-per-view. And I basically explained this, Billy, and said, there's so much wrestling now. Every day you can turn on any device and watch new wrestling, wrestling matches. Some guy versus some guy. Probably be a really good match too, because there's loads of really good talent out there. But how many of them actually have any real sort of emotional investment? Right? It's like, it's so fast paced that I was like, we're not going to make a dent in the genre if we just jump in with that set, doing the same shit as everyone else. And so we sort of started, loosely forming what would go on to be the 10 Pounds of Gold series. But the part that's so fun for me is like, Tim was the existing NWA champion when Billy bought the NWA. There were other champions as well, and Billy's original intention was to just strip them all and just sort of, start from scratch, until he met Tim. And I just remember getting a call and being told, I don't know what it is about this guy, but there's just something about this guy. Like, and I want you to tell me if you think that you can, because I feel like there's something there. So Billy got it. Like and I saw this sit down interview that Dave Lagana had done with Tim. And Tim was just so genuine and wholesome and authentic. I was just like, the promoter in me was just like, this, I can't wait to be the antagonist to this protagonist, because that's how I think. Like, I'm not like a lot of wrestlers today where they go like, oh, I could have such a great match and we could do so many cool moves and high spots. Like, I saw this character and went, wow, like the story I could tell with this guy, the the heat, the sort of the contrast. Like, wrestling to me is about a contrast of personalities, a clash of styles, clash of personalities, like so many guys miss the mark because they're constantly trying to book dream matches where it's like two guys with identical skill sets and like similar looks and similar personalities and stuff wrestling each other. I said, well, what's the fun in that? That's not what the business is about. The business is about conflict, contrast of, clash of styles, not, oh, these two guys do the exact same shit, so they'll just do it, they'll just do it to each other. Like, all right, cool. What else you got? I looked at Tim, and I just, for me, it's, and the fact that we were able to get, we turned people's opinions so quickly in the beginning. We saw all the, wrestling internet, wrestling Twitter sort of go, NWA, what the hell, what the hell's that? Who gives a shit about that? What's, what even is that anymore? And like, who the hell's this guy? And within months, it's like, oh, Sam Roberts wants to have you on the show, and Busted Open want to have you on the show, and,
right.
like PWI, and, it's like, all right. We knew because we had something, we did it differently, and we didn't pretend to be anything. Right. We said, here we are, here's what we do, this is it. Like, and people went, oh, I'm actually invested in this because I'm not being bullshitted. Like, the story was what was real, right? Like, there is no part of anything I've done as NWA champion that isn't real, in the sense that no part of anything I said or did was 100% from me, like, and it was verifiable fact, like about who I am and my career, my personality, whatever. I don't have a fake name. I'm not being told what to say. I'm not pretending to do anything. It's like everything's based around reality. And that's why I think it's hard. It's much easier for people to suspend their disbelief like that.
One of the things is that I've always been a huge NWA fan growing up in the 80s, and the thing that I liked about once Billy Corgan took over was that it reminded me of the NWA that I grew up with, especially with Power.
Right.
It just right to, the studio setting, and it's just the excitement. And that's I became fully invested at that point, right? When you guys held the 70th anniversary show, I mean, obviously with All In and the 10 pounds of gold, but then took us into the 70th anniversary show. And I thought it was an amazing show. And I was just like, I was so looking forward to it. And then Power came, a few months later, almost a year later. It's just
the Crockett Cup. We did the
in the Crockett Cup. Yep. And it was just, my God, it's so good. Just like the old days.
Those shows that you described, that's who we are. It's like, to your point. We're not trying to be. I think people get off on the wrong exit with us sometimes because they think that we're trying to almost we're sort of doing we're trying to do an old school thing, like a gimmick,
right?
Where WWE would do old school Raw, and they would deliberately have the old set and like that. That's not that. I thought those shows were tremendous, by the way, but that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're staying true to the elements of the brand that are recognizable, the same way that the NFL does, or the NBA, or the NHL. Here's a perfect example. You see a lot of time, and they're obviously young fans, and it's it's interesting to me to see, how they think and how they interact, but. We got so many sort of comments and feedback to the effect of why don't you guys update the belt? No. That's the whole point
Right.
Like, would you change the Super Bowl trophy? Like, the Lombardi trophy? Yeah, we've had that thing for years. Like, we need a new one. Everyone would lose their mind. You know, like, that's the point. Like, it's a prize. The prize, the trophy, is what links the generations and what
the heritage,
the value in that prize, right? The fact that you can see Ric Flair, Harley Race, Dusty Rhodes, you know, these guys holding the same championship.
Right.
That's the point. Like, because now it's like, now there's a credibility to it and there's a value to it, and that's that's the whole, like, that's, and the same thing with the apron skirts and the now we're going to update things here and there. Obviously, power is a brand new thing.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I thought that the visual, the graphic design and the visual effects people that worked on power designing the set and the graphics and everything just did an unbelievable job. I mean, like, when I saw those, I was just like, oh, like, these guys have just nailed it, because it was fresh, but it made you feel like you were seeing something that was that created a nostalgia. And for us, like, what we determined and what I still firmly believe and what we'll stand by, I think, is that it's nostalgic to fans of, let's say, your generation, but to other generations, it's brand new.
Right.
So really, it works both ways, because it's not like everyone's going like, what's this? It's not like we're not doing shows in black and white. You know what I mean? It's like, like we have good production values. Like, we're not, we're sort of, it's not, we're not using it as a way to sort of cover up, like, sort of deficiencies. Yeah. We're doing it to enhance, like, the talent and the product and to make us stand out, and it's our branding. That's all.
Right. Honestly, before, like, when you relaunched the NWA, I wasn't watching a whole lot of wrestling. I had taken a couple years off, and the only thing I really would watch is, like, when my oldest son, would watch, like, Raw, and those were the only events I would take him to. But then, I just so happened to hear that the NWA was being relaunched and stuff, and then I started watching the 10 Pounds of Gold and all that stuff. I just became, fully invested, and it made me open up to wrestling again as a whole, and really get back into the whole entire thing.
Well, it's cool to hear that, but it's remarkable how many people I've heard that same sentiment from, where they said, I sort of given up watching wrestling, and watching the NWA, on YouTube sort of got me back into keeping up with the product. And then they started watching AEW, or they started watching Ring of Honor again because of the guys. So it's like, first of all, you're welcome, guys. But secondly, it's like, that's what encourages me that my instinct on this is right. Like, that we can continue to build and attract audience by doing what we do, and that's because I think that there are a lot of people who feel, and look, I don't want this to turn into a sort of, I don't want this to be seen as me sort of bashing the WWE or any other product out there, but, like, Young Rock just debuted on TV. Yes, it's network, so so that you got to take that into account. But I heard that they did, like, over 5 million viewers or something for that debut episode. So that's a hell of a lot more than watching cable, wrestling on cable now. Mm-hmm. So clearly there is an appetite because yes, obviously Rock has transcended the business and is a huge star by himself, but this show is specifically the premise of the show specifically about him as a young man growing up in the wrestling business. So it's like clearly there is an interest in that as a subject matter, right? As a sort of and so again, it just encourages me when I heard the numbers for that. It just encouraged me even more, like because we're wrestling, that's what. We're proud of it. That's what that's what we intend to continue to be.
Now, you talked about nostalgia and prestige. Somebody who really brought value to the NWA was somebody of Ricky Morton's caliber. You actually had the opportunity of facing Ricky Morton on NWA Power. How was that like? And just to see someone of his caliber just continue to develop as he gets older, as he's putting new moves into his arsenal, just like Dustin Rhodes throughout the years.
Dude, I can't say enough good stuff about Ricky Morton. Just the guy's energy and zest for life and love for the business is, it's just unbelievable. And the thing I really love about Ricky is the fact that he has not. He's obviously they've stayed true to their branding, like the Rock and Roll Express, right? And to a point now where they stuck with it long enough where now it's like a nostalgic, it's now that's their gimmick, is that like the mullet and the tassels and the look and everything, like
right.
And I'm sure that there was pressure on them, when they got into the 90s and stuff, to maybe change their look or sort of try to update, and they just stayed true and went, nope, like we're the Rock and Roll Express. But what they've never done is he's never sort of romanticized his era to a point where he like trashes everything else, right? Which happens with a lot of guys. It happens so much in our industry. It's not just our people do it with everything. People do it with music. They do it with with TV shows. They do it with toys, video games. What's this new bullshit? It's not as good as the Eagles. Music today ain't music. Oh man, give me Bruce Springsteen any day over this Joker. Who the fuck? And it's like people do this, right? Because they associate certain stuff with their period of innocence in their life, and then over time you create this idea in your head that it was just so much better than everything else, and that doesn't help move things forward. The difference between the difference between our business and every other genre I just described is that in order for this business to have to maintain a level of quality, every generation needs the generation before them to work with, to develop the skills, because you only get good at this by working with people better than you and with reps. And what happens, if you get all these people that become so in love with their own legend and their own past and their own era, that then they just shut down and they just, they don't want to help anyone in the next generation because they just want to, because their ego demands that because it was like, they don't want them to get any better, because then they can point and they say, see, they're not as good as we were. And it's like, that doesn't help the business. And
right.
then you get guys like Ricky Morton and Hoot, and they're just like, they'll work with everyone, they'll help. They're like, hey, listen, Ricky was, every time I saw him at Power, he always had somebody, he was always talking to someone about something, giving them advice, and going through stuff with them. And like, I really hope that we can utilize his mind as an agent, and I think that he'll be. I think that he'll be a part of the NWA fabric, for the foreseeable future in a lot of different capacities. Let's just say that. But when it comes to our match, that was my request. I wanted that. Like, we were going through sort of how we looked at, well, like what was going to sort of happen with the next season and kind of where we thought things were going. And they had an idea to sort of have like a feature-length season finale as opposed to a pay-per-view, almost sort of like a Saturday night's main event type of, or a Clash of Champions type of vibe, where it was like a feature-length, free TV, free episode, obviously free YouTube, whatever. And we sort of, and maybe it was because I was thinking about like Clash of Champions and and sort of harking back, but we needed an opponent for me to have a longer match with, and to have and something that would really sort of capture the vibe of like the NWA and what we're all about. And we were kicking different ideas around, and we didn't want to hot shot someone that we could potentially get a pay-per-view buy from. And conversation came to, what about Ricky Morton? And I was just like, ooh, that's like, I want that match. That's like, I wanted to do it for me. I wanted to be able to say that I wrestled Ricky Morton one time. Like, so, I'm sure the match wasn't everyone's cup of tea, as far as, in the current climate with sort of the, dives and high spots and, big moves and everything. But it gets brought up enough to where obviously it resonated with people on a different level. And that's what I'm in the game to do.
You look at Ricky Morton, he was ahead of those guys, like doing a lot of that kind of stuff that you just mentioned, 30 years ago. And, the fact that guy, what's he's close to 70, 65, around there?
60s. Yeah, I don't know exactly if he's 60.
That guy could still move, for that age, and considering how long he's been doing it.
Yeah, look, and for me, again, it's like, I pride myself on being able to tell a good story with anyone, because the story is the thing. That's for me, it's not it's like we talked about with Tim Storm. I didn't look at it and go, oh, well, he doesn't do a whole lot, and oh man, I can't have a good match. Like, I can tell a good story. So it's like that's.
Right.
And I the same way about Ricky Morton. I was like, because the curiosity factor was that I knew was going to be enough to get people to watch. So I wonder how this is going to go, and once you that's all you need. You set the hook, and I think we had done enough, and they had won I don't know, had they won the tag titles by then? I can't remember, but
I believe so.
I think they had, and so there was already enough kind of like, well, you never know, it might, because you never know, you just might win the title because you'd never won it before,
right?
And so that's again, it's testament to our ability to promote, that we to create enough doubt where people go, well, maybe, you never know.
With all the organizations, the NWA, some NWA talent has ended up, working for All Elite Wrestling.
Let me just stop you there. That's an annoying narrative that I have to keep addressing on interviews. That some talent who worked on NWA, many of those guys were not. They were NWA talent. They were, They were guys who perhaps were seen for the first time on the NWA, but were working on short-term contracts. That's what, you know what I mean? It's like, again, it's like I talked about before with this people's eagerness to make comparisons between a startup company and the market leader who's a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. Like, sorry guys, the NWA is not in a position to sign a ton of talent to six-figure full-time contracts. Most of those guys who, left were not under contract at that time. That's why they were able to go wherever they felt, and they were encouraged to do so. Like it was kind of like, hell yeah, like good on you, man. Like you took advantage of your opportunity and used the platform. It was a mutually beneficial relationship. Like,
right.
You helped our show, you helped the show, and in the process increased your market value to the point where someone wanted to snap you up and sign you to a contract. Anyway, I just want to make that clarification because it's this annoying narrative that people seem to keep putting out in wrestling media that like the NWA have quote lost a lot of talent. It's like take it from someone who for the majority of the time is the only talent under contract. Like there's a few other, like Thunder Rosa is under a contract, Camille's under contract, there's a few other guys under contract, but like for the longest time the only full-time talent under contract was me. Like everyone else was being brought in and worked with on a season by season basis. So yeah.
I just was going to say that, like, Thunder Rosa did show up there as the NWA Women's Champion. I was going to say, is there ever a chance that you will pop up with the NWA title on there, or you don't know?
If it made sense, if it was good for business, if it was the right thing to do. Right now, I don't personally think it's the right thing to do right now because I'm not suggesting that AEW don't need me. They don't need my help. You could argue the point that they don't need any individual person, right? But right now, they would benefit the most from that because until we had a situation where we could sort of make a suitable trade. And we had something to monetize that trade with, right? Like a pay-per-view or, then that's a different story. But it's like, Rosa's situation is a bit different. Obviously that's that's helping establish the value in that title because that women's title needed more establishing. It needed more because it hadn't been exposed as much. There's a different situation, and it's like, if I keep showing up on AEW, then what's the point of who needs to watch NWA Power? Right?
Yeah, you're right. Danny.
Now, as much as a successful singles competitor you've turned out to be, you've actually established yourself as a tag team competitor as well. How is it like not only feuding, but teaming up with Samoa Joe, not only during your TNA days, but you actually did some time teaming up with him during Pro Wrestling Noah.
Yeah. Well, the Noah deal was a working agreement with TNA. Look, my time with Joe as a tag partner is probably the most important and valuable period in my career, outside of what I've done with the NWA, because it got me to another level. Joe has done a great deal for me, and in my opinion, sort of set me up and put me in a position where I could make a good living at this and set myself up for the future. So I'm always eternally grateful to him, and he knows that. I learned a lot through osmosis, but I also got a credibility boost. I think it was a way for the TNA audience at that time, who had seen me as, seen my sort of, seen the sort of failed sort of Brutus Magnus kind of character, which was doomed to fail from the beginning. It wasn't me. It was rushed. It wasn't like, Russo and the guys at Creative didn't really know what they didn't really know what to do with me. It was like no one could really explain to me what the character even was. It was just like I felt so, and I was so green. So it was like the worst combination. It wasn't like I was an experienced worker who could go, okay, I'll take this and kind of do something with it. I was literally at that kind of phase. I was 21, you know, I was like, yes, sir, I'll do whatever. So, you know, so I was going out and shit in the bed because, like, I didn't think I could do what I was told kind of thing. Anyway, but I sort of worked through that and then had the time with the British invasion, which had been great. And I'd sort of improved enough where you could, you know, the company was willing to invest in me long term, but it was like we had a revolving door at that time of bookers and head honchos, and every single time it was the same thing. They didn't know who I was, so they would come in, and I would go right back down to the back. I would go right back to the back of the line. Oh, who's this guy? Who gives a shit? Like, I don't know nothing about England. Oh, you know, who gladiators were, you know, they didn't know it, right? They did, you know, because TNA is the only company that would hire people to run the company who never watch a show. Each guy that would come in to run the company never watched it. You could tell they'd never watched a show because the only people they knew what to do with were people that they were already familiar with. So anyway, it was frustrating. And then, luckily for me, you know, remarkable when you think about it, but they didn't really know what to do with Joe either at that point. So they threw us together. Literally, I know they didn't expect it to work because they told me that. Like, they said, we didn't expect this to work, and you guys have. You know, I mean, Russo even said that. He was like, we put you guys together because you were both pissed off and angry that you weren't doing enough, and we didn't expect it to work, but we figured it would kill a couple of weeks of TV, and you guys have gone on to be one of the hottest acts we have, and we were at that time. Like, but I think in a lot of ways it was because the audience was starting to understand like how things were shaking out for a lot of the guys like me. You know, they could see all this stuff happening and going like, man, this guy's like our guy. You know, he's been here. He's like trying to, you know, and then I would take a backseat to Orlando Jordan. You know what I mean? Like someone, like some other ex-WWE. You know what I mean? Like someone else would come in. Oh, he was in WWE, so let's put him all over the show. And I think like the TNA audience started going, no man, no, and I'm not singling out Orlando Jordan. I don't have any problem with him. Do you know what I mean? But it was like, as a good example, you know, I think the audience started going, we don't want to see Orlando Jordan. We want to see this guy. You know, like we want our guys. Like, and so then when they put me with Joe, you could feel people sort of go like, oh, okay. You know, like, and I was such a big fan of Joe's that I, you know, found it very easy to play off of his stuff. Mm-hmm. And I pretty much just sort of slotted myself in and got the rub off of his, you know, however he was. And as a result, people started going, hey, we like this guy. You know, this guy Magnus is kind of grafting. He's sticking at it and we like him, you know, and they started looking past the surface of sort of going like, oh, guys, we got a big guy with a good physique. He's getting pushed. Like, and they started actually kind of really looking, going, you know, well, actually, yeah, there is a lot of good qualities to this guy. We can actually get behind him, you know, because he's improved and he wants it and he's working hard. And that's why I think why it worked, because people appreciated that we were working hard.
Now, obviously, going down that line, you could probably see that TNA was starting to build like a trust fund with you, because not only with Joe, you also started teaming up with the likes of Kurt Angle and Sting, in which you actually had a match with Sting for the championship, in which that was the end of Sting's TNA career. How was it like to go against someone of his caliber?
Well, I don't really think about that match, because that match was such a debacle and such a farce that it was like, yeah, you know, historically speaking, when you if you summarize it in one sentence, it sounds cool, like, oh, you had Sting's last match, but if you actually watch it, it was embarrassing. And Sting hated it, I hated it, everyone hated it. You know, it was done deliberately to sabotage me, and that just is what it is. But what I take more pride in is the match we had at Bound for Glory, and Sting, you know, insisting on that and kind of pushing for that and saying like, this is, you know, this is who I want to wrestle. This is who I want to sort of, you know, pass the torch to, really, in a lot of ways, give the rub to, and you know, and get that emotional investment with. And again, Sting's another guy. You know, I can't convey accurately how grateful I am to him for how many times he went out of his way to be like, give this guy the ball, give this guy an opportunity, like, trust this guy, like, he's, you know, he's gonna get there. Like, I think honestly, the again, it's not like I spend, you know, hours and hours sort of lamenting on this, but when I think back to it, and maybe it's because obviously Steve showed up at AEW recently, so now it's sort of in the consciousness again, because I've been asked about it a few more times, so I think I've thought about it again. But you know, for me, the only frustrating part of all that was that I think to myself, God, if I'd have got to work with Sting just a few years later, like I think I was 26 when I wrestled Sting, and I was just like not quite there yet. Like I was still kind of finding myself a little bit, and you know, because that's the problem with sort of corporate wrestling, I guess, for lack of a better term, is that, you know, it wasn't until I left TNA that I really found myself, because it was like I'd never been allowed to do. It was you're always doing a kind of a compromise of like how you see yourself and how a team of other people see you. And even when I was the world champion, you know, and Steve played a big part in that, because after we wrestled at Bound for Glory, Sting was the one who said to them, you make that mean something. Go all the way with this guy. You know, like he was the one pushing for that, you know. Even Kurt, I remember Kurt being like, I know you know this, but you realize like what a huge deal this is. I was like, yeah, you know, I really do. But it was like, even then, it was, you know, it was always, here's what we want you to say, here's what we want you to do, you know. And it was kind of like, I remember having a conversation, and this is probably why I didn't, you know, why my time with the title didn't last that long, because John Gaburick at the time didn't want to hear it. But I was kind of like, if I can't have a say when I'm the world champion, when can I have a say? Like, if I'm the top guy, and I was doing good numbers, like the ratings had gone up and we're holding. House shows have gone up. I remember Raphael, who now works for AEW, him coming to me and saying, hey, houses are up. You know, like they weren't, you know, they were TNA houses, so there weren't anything to write home about, but they were up. You know, and he would always make sure that I knew that. Hey, champ, like, you know, houses are up. Like, since you've been world champion, you know, numbers are up. And it was like, but every week I would have to fight on everything. Like, I think it's better if we do it like this. No, don't, you know, you don't get paid to write. You get paid to just do what we say. And I'd be like, if I'm the world, this is how things are when you're the world champion. Like, you know,
right.
When is it going to, you know, if you can't have a say now, when can you have a say? And that's when I knew I was leaving. I made up my mind when I was the world champion that I wasn't going to stay. I remember my buddies in the company, like, we'd all be hanging out, and I'd be like, when my contract's up, I'm out of here. And they'd be like, what are you doing? You're crazy. Like, you're the world champion. I can't believe you're saying that. I'd be like, yeah, it's like, because I already figured it out. I was like, they're not ever really going to give me the ball properly. Like, because they just didn't. And I think that, you know, obviously I don't want to speak for AJ, but I think in many ways that was kind of how he felt about it too. It was a money thing with him too, but I think in his mind it was the same kind of situation where it was like, they only ever trusted the ex-WWE guys, like, to fully have a say, you know, even with AJ, who was like, you know, the face of the company more than anyone else. It was like, even with him, you know, got the feeling that he never got the same amount of sort of respect as say a Kurt Angle or or Sting, right? It was always kind of that like, hey, just do what we say, and I think that's probably went into, again, I don't want to speak for him, but I dare say that was kind of what went into his thinking too. And again, look at how much he evolved after he left. Like, it just needed that bit of freedom to just be like, I know how to put the finishing touch on this, and if you just let me, I'll fucking do it. And he did. And then if you look at me, yeah, it took me a bit longer, but same sort of thing when I left, after, when I started doing stuff at the NWA, I had complete sort of control over how I presented myself. And it was like, if you just let me put the finishing touches on this myself, like, I promise you I know how to do it. And now, no one even talks about it. Unless they're talking about it in a situation like this, no one even brings up TNA with me. Because
right.
Magnus is dead. You know what I mean? Like, Nick Aldis is the guy that people give a shit about.